1 Chronicles 27. Let's call this one Organized for Loyalty, as the first part of this chapter is going to describe the divisions of David's military leaders, commanders, etc. And then it's going to go on to talk about the leaders of the families before it finally gives us a description of his close counselors and advisors. But in describing these three groups of folks, three names stood out to me. First, Benaiah, who might not have been the mightiest of men, but he was one of the mighty men. How do we know? Well, verse 5 is going to say this: the third commander for the third month was Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, the chief priest. In his division were 24,000. This is the Benaiah who was a mighty man of the 30 and in command of the 30. And one of the interesting things about Benaiah is, one, he's not the only Benaiah in this chapter, but it seems like he is the same Benaiah that's going to come up again at the end of the chapter, where it reads in verse 33, Ahithophel was the king's counselor, and Hushai the Archite was the king's friend. Ahithophel was succeeded by Jehoiada, the son of Benaiah, and Abiathar. Joab was commander of the king's army. And the three I want to focus on are Ahithophel, Benaiah, and Joab, assuming that this Benaiah is the same one from the beginning of the chapter, one of the mighty men. See, this gives us an indication of a term that I had trouble with early on when looking at the Beatitudes, or the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus goes through all the different things that makes us blessed. And one of those was meekness. And because it sounds like weakness, I might have quite possibly gotten it confused with weakness. But understand, Benaiah is going to be a man who serves not only David, but Solomon in a different role. See, whereas Joab is the commander of David's army, Benaiah is going to become the commander of Solomon's army by personally replacing Joab, who, as we've already mentioned, has killed 2 men in peacetime. And he had a personal interest in it because those were 2 men who David was sending to replace him. And so in these 3 men, Joab, Benaiah, and Ahithophel, we are seeing 3 men confronted with the reality of meekness in different ways, understanding that Ahithophel was a man who was described as seeming as though his counsel came directly from God. So in David's court, there didn't seem to be anyone wiser. And so he was confronted with the need to submit his great wisdom to the service of a powerful king who was a great soldier, but probably was never going to be as wise as he was. And likewise, Benaiah, once he became commander of Solomon's army, he was going to have to submit his great power to the service of a man who was never going to be as tough as he was, but was wise enough to lead Israel into an unprecedented point in its history. And so in being meek enough to submit his power to Solomon, he had the potential to reach heights he never reached even under David, a great king. But submission to Solomon wasn't going to be enough. Why? Because Joab, another powerful, crafty general, submitted to David as well. But when it was time for a change, he was not able to submit to David fully, meaning he was killing the men that David was sending to replace him. And so under pressure, Joab gambled on his power being enough to secure his position. Ahithophel seems to have made a similar mistake, gambling on his wisdom, when after David sinned with Bathsheba, he took the opportunity to give his wisdom to Absalom in hopes of overthrowing David, not accounting for the fact that even though David sinned, God was still with David. And so in gambling on his wisdom, Ahithophel, as wise as he was, learned the hard way the limits of his wisdom, helping us all understand this. Talent has limits. And my memory's not great on this one, but I'm pretty sure I got to hear an interview with one of Michael Jordan's former teammates a while back, who reportedly said in conversations with Michael, he said that Clyde Drexler, one of his contemporaries and rivals, was probably, if not as talented, maybe almost as talented as Michael. But Michael said Clyde didn't know how to play the game outside of the game, meaning outside of basketball, there was a power structure beyond them that had a lot to do with whether or not they succeeded. And if that's something that Michael Jordan actually realized and said, it's completely consistent with what would eventually become known as star treatment, something that great stars in the NBA have depended on for years to basically take their careers to another level beyond where their talent alone would probably have taken them. And so Michael Jordan had a wisdom, once again, if that quote is accurate, that understood that even 2 similar talents can have 2 very different paths if they don't know how to play both the game of basketball and the larger politics that affect their ability for their talents to reach their potential. But this chapter might give us a great chance to understand how Ahithophel gambled on his ability to negotiate politics through his great wisdom, and Joab took a loss or an L trying to negotiate politics through his great power. Solomon, through his wisdom, realized, wait a minute, all I got to do after seeing Joab kill 2 replacements is send one he can't kill. And Benaiah was noted as being a mighty man, and sure enough, he was a man that Joab couldn't kill. And so Benaiah replaced Joab by aligning, or through meekness, submitting his great power, not just to Solomon's wisdom, but Solomon sending a just command from God to execute Joab for the murders he committed playing politics. And so even though both Joab and Ahithophel were successful for a while playing the politics of both power and wisdom, Benaiah, even though he's not a name we would recognize as much, he might have had both more longevity and more peace as a high official in Israel, not only submitting through meekness his great strength to Solomon's wisdom, but submitting his strength to Solomon's wisdom insofar as it was aligned with God, the God who existed above the politics in Israel.